So one, we are offering there's another lecture on Monday. Dr. Peter Pramataris will be discussing, it's like a diagnosis primer on ADHD, executive functioning, learning disabilities. It will be not at Squircle Hall, but it will be at the Opera House in a different theater. There still are tickets available. If you're interested, just contact us. And again, that's next Monday. We're also will be offering, which we haven't marketed this yet, but May 31st, there is a CEU approved event. The CTLEs are pending, but should hopefully come through. It's on writing development, and Dr. Anthony, you say hi, sorry. He will be offering that course as well. Okay, great, thank you. And we will offer tickets for that probably in a few weeks. So just want to give you some updates about some upcoming events. And then aside from that, we will not be offering anything else in the spring or the summer, but we plan on having this conversation with everybody into the fall. So if you have any feedback for us, where you would like to learn about a certain topic, just please let us know. There's a lot of amazing professionals in New York City, and we're more than happy to reach out to these professionals. If you're really interested in dyslexia and you want to see part 2 or have more conversations with parents and professionals, let us know. Again, we're really open to feedback, so we would really appreciate that. We're kind of new to having these offerings. This is something that's been on our agenda for a while, and now we're finally executing, and we're really excited to get more involved with professionals and the community at large. All right, so we're going to officially get started, and my name is Craig Selinger. I'm a licensed speech-language therapist. I have expertise in language-based learning difficulties. I'm also the CEO of 2 companies, Themba Tutors and Brooklyn Letters. Both offer in-home and at-school academic and speech-language therapy throughout New York City, Westchester, and Long Island. And I'm very happy to have an amazing panel of professionals here who are going to discuss dyslexia. And first up, I'd like to introduce Ruth Arberman. She's the founder of the Sterling School, and she's also a literacy interventionist. She'll discuss Orton Gillingham, and she'll discuss the Sterling School as well. We have Dr. Lindsay Whitman. She is a pediatric neuropsychologist, and her main expertise is assessments, where parents, if they have concerns, if their child is not learning well or having difficulties in school, she does neuropsychological evaluations, and she'll discuss that further. We have Jonathan Gottlieb, who is an attorney, and his brother Mark is also here. And Jonathan will discuss, so he specializes in special needs law. So he'll discuss the legal aspects of dyslexia. And then we have Chantal Aflalo. She's a special needs advisor, and she's been working with families throughout the years. Particularly, she helps families if they have a child, for example, diagnosed with dyslexia, and they have to navigate the current school situation, or they're transitioning to a new school, or they're looking for other schools. She helps accommodates families along that path. And but overall, dyslexia, it's a really complicated maze, and in New York City, it's a unique beast when it comes to dyslexia. And these 4 professionals, fortunately, have been helping countless families kind of navigate that maze, and they're here to discuss it. So what we're going to do is I will ask our panelists some questions, and we'll have some conversations, and then we'll open it up to the floor, where if you have any questions for the panel, you're more than welcome. We are going to, at around 8:45, we were going to wrap it up, and then at 9 o'clock we have to exit Squircle Hall, but there's cookies, refreshments. Some of the panelists may be able to hang out for a little bit, so if you have any questions for them, we'll be around. And then again, anything that that you have a chance to ask, or just email us. We're quite responsive to emails, and you could always email myself, Craig@Tutors.com, and I can make sure I can pass along to our panelists. So I have to figure out where I'm going to sit. That's the first. Is there a seat over here? Oh, there is. Okay, great. Okay. All right. So the first question I'm going to ask is, let's start with the definition. What is dyslexia? And you think it's, there's a term dyslexia, it's easy to define, it's easy to figure out if a child is dyslexic or not, but it's a lot more complicated than that. So usually when a family is pursuing that evaluation, a neuropsychologist who has expertise in dyslexia plays a crucial role in determining that diagnosis. So we're going to start with Dr. Lindsay Whitman, who will discuss that.
Can you hear me? So as Craig alluded to, dyslexia is indeed very complicated in terms of diagnosis. There are at least 3 reputable sources that list a definition of dyslexia. One is called DSM, and that's generally what we use in terms of looking at whether a child meets criteria in the neuropsychology field. But there's also other sources. There's an expert consensus, and then there's also special education law that has very specific definitions around what it is, and they are not all the same. And that's, I think, really important to put out there, because there are some very specific things that must be identified if indeed a child's going to be diagnosed with dyslexia, but there is a lot of areas that are a little bit more vague or muddy. But the one thing that all of these sources do agree on is that dyslexia is indicated when a child is struggling with reading, specifically fluency, most usually, in a way that is impacting them to a clinically significant degree. And also, it's important to indicate that a child is experiencing these difficulties in the absence of difficulties or lower IQ or a neurological disease, or perhaps lack of education, or something that would otherwise account for low reading. So the word that we use often is an unexpected difficulty in reading. And historically, much of the diagnosis hinged on the identification of a deficit with regard to phonological processing and phonics, and that is essentially the link between letters and sounds. Which is still very important, but recent research has indicated that that doesn't necessarily always have to be present in a child with dyslexia. And so again, we're getting back to the muddy part, so it's clear, but also not clear.
So Lindsay, let's say there's a family and they have a young child, and the child is struggling with literacy. Now, what's the earliest you can diagnose a child with dyslexia? And then 2, is it possible that the student or the child doesn't have dyslexia, but might have what's called like a reading disorder, or something else? It's not dyslexia, right, but maybe something else is going on, and there's a reason why that child is really struggling with literacy?
So it's important to make the distinction between, I think, a reading disorder and dyslexia. And the simplest way to put that is dyslexia is sort of a subtype of a reading disorder. Other types of reading disorders may encompass children that are having problems comprehending what they read. So they can actually get through the paragraph just fine, but then at the end of the paragraph they have very little understanding of what they just read. That is a different type of reading disorder, so dyslexia is sort of a subtype. So yes, that sort of thing could be going on. Attention problems could be going on, leading to difficulties with reading, and that's a whole different set of expectations, and you would certainly be looking at the child very differently. But with regard to your question of how early, I think there's a common misunderstanding out there with regard to diagnosing too early. I've heard from many schools that sort of this cutoff at about 8 or 9. I think it's just simply not true. The markers for dyslexia are very clear, especially in cases in which the situation is obvious and well developed. And in my practice, I am comfortable diagnosing children as young as 4 and 5 because the earlier the better. And to me,
not to interrupt. So
yeah.
if you have a 4 or 5-year-old who, I mean, if you look at the norms, 4-year-olds are not supposed to be reading.
Mm-hmm.
So why would a parent who may be concerned that their child is not reading, maybe they're too early. It's too early for them to learn how to read. So how would you diagnose a child as young as 4 with dyslexia?
So reading is obviously a link to language in general. And often children who develop dyslexia will show markers quite early, some of which are related to acquiring a first word. And often because of dyslexia, it's often just a little late. It's not an obvious late talker. Perhaps it's a child who's acquiring their first word at, say, 15, 16 months instead of 12 months. 3 and 4-year-olds that often later become diagnosed with dyslexia may have shown indicators that they were insensitive to rhyme, or they simply had a very difficult time learning the alphabet. No matter what, they only could sing it. They couldn't actually say it because they actually had memorized the sound. Often kids that young who present later with dyslexia, sometimes they actually present with articulation or difficulties with fluent speech just a little bit too long. Often, 2-year-olds, you'll hear their articulation struggles, but often it will extend into sort of their late 3s or even their early 4s or even 5s. So there's some sort of general markers with regard to language that are well linked to dyslexia.
So in other words, if you're a parent, you shouldn't necessarily just focus on the literacy. You may want to look at the full picture, and maybe there's other kind of indicators that may be linked to literacy that may show that maybe this child's not on.
Certainly, yeah.
Okay.
It certainly, if you're dealing with a child that young.
Yes.
Absolutely. Of course, and family history is obviously very important. Dyslexia is considered moderately heritable, and so I think there's a 1 in 5 chance that your child will develop dyslexia if a first-degree family member has been diagnosed with it.
Now, on the flip side, there are students that aren't diagnosed and don't have academic difficulties early on, and then sometimes around 3rd or 4th grade, there's like a wall. Something happens to some of these students where they're not effectively learning. If you look at maybe like the report cards, everything seemed fine. Parents are a bit surprised. And then, then there's a concern maybe around 3rd or 4th grade or even later. So how is that some of these kids just kind of float by and then all of a sudden like something's up where, and everyone's kind of caught off guard. Like, why does that happen?
Yeah. So children who have dyslexia often are well able to compensate. A lot of them memorize words instead of having to learn strategies to decode new words. They're able to amass tremendous vocabularies or sight word vocabularies based on just because they're often quite bright and they're often savvy and they have well-developed thinking skills and they often find ways to get around it. So that's one. But the other reason that 3rd or 4th grade tends to be a time when many children end up in my office is because at that point the curriculum sort of shifts from focusing on teaching children to read to assessing how they're understanding what they're reading. And so it's sort of as if these children are not able to sort of compensate any longer because they are not able to understand what they're reading, and so it's no longer, it's an overwhelming challenge. And there's other curriculum-related changes involving executive functioning, that often come on board, and it's sort of like an avalanche for these kids. And by that time, unfortunately, a lot of times self-esteem has become implicated, and they've become depressed or anxious because they can't understand why they're having trouble.
So it could be like a snowball effect. So
Right.
sometimes if you wait too long, there could be ramifications in other areas of development that could really impact the child.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So would you, if you're a parent and maybe you're noticing that something's not right with your child with literacy, is it best to be proactive or just kind of wait and see?
It is best to be proactive. I cannot emphasize that enough. I think current research indicates that by about age 8 or 9, it becomes infinitely more difficult to intervene, simply for multiple reasons, but I think the most simple and the most convincing reason is that the brain begins to change, and it's just not quite as plastic, and so it's more difficult for the interventional means to make change. So the longer you wait, the more difficult it may be for that child to catch up, and also the gaps simply widen each year in which a child's left to their own devices without the proper intervention. And so the earlier the better.
To what you said, it also has to do with the fact that the kids are no longer learning to read, but reading to learn. So you have a whole shift
Right.
in what they're exposed to in the classroom. So that also eats away at their self-esteem. They
That's
can
true.
see the gap. You can't hear me, right? Okay, so I just realized that.
Yeah. I think we have to do one at a time, is that right? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, the engineer is. Yeah, well, the engineer, I think will
English.
yeah.
My son so badly.
So maybe we'll just use a louder voice, just in the time being.
Okay. I'm gonna shift it.
Yeah.
Something I should do.
Okay. Okay, so one other question, and then there's, the panelists, there's a lot to share. So one thing is that if you're a parent, should you just rely on the Board of Ed to kind of, one, identify that your child is having difficulties with literacy, and then why would, and then if they do, in terms of their assessments, I know there's different types of assessments the Board of Ed can offer, but then there's assessments they can offer, right? And then if they can offer those assessments, what should a family do? Why would they seek a private evaluation?
Correct. The type of evaluation that one will receive through the Department of Ed is termed a psychoeducational evaluation. And the type of evaluation that one would secure privately may also be a psychoeducational evaluation, but the most comprehensive and, in my opinion, the best if the question relates to dyslexia is a neuropsychological evaluation, and a psychoed differs from a neuropsych. The most important difference is the goal of a psychoed is to simply answer the question of whether a child qualifies for services. Does he or she qualify, or does he or she not? And also to indicate what types of services. But it is not designed to really delve into any type of diagnostic profile. The DOE is not able to render any diagnoses, but more importantly, really delve into sort of why the child is struggling. They may be able to sort of identify generally that they need speech and language therapy, or they need occupational therapy, or reading support, or math support, but the why behind it is not necessarily indicated. And as I spoke to earlier, there's many different reasons why a child could be struggling academically, and it may even go so far as reading is the presenting concern, but actually attention is the primary problem. And so you may, without knowing the why behind it, it's really challenging to design a comprehensive plan. And with a neuropsych, that opportunity is afforded, and children are able to sort of parents are able to gain a greater understanding of what to do in terms of a treatment plan. In New York specifically, the neuropsych, I might have to defer to Chantal on this, but I believe most private placement special education schools require the neuropsych in order to secure a patient. So it differs in terms of level of comprehensiveness, essentially.
Ruth, do you accept an
I think I have to turn
psycho ed?
I think that.
It really depends on what was done.
Well, let me jump in. First of all, Ruth, tell everyone about the Sterling School.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Sterling is a private school, 2nd grade through 6th, for children whose primary issue is dyslexia, some of whom have comorbid ADHD, meaning they have dyslexia and some attentional issues. And we have some students who have dyslexia and some broader-based language issues. So, dyslexia is not so neat and clean. There's about a 40% comorbid rate with other conditions. So they often kind of snowball each other. If you may not be that severely dyslexic, but if you have ADHD as well, it ends up being more problematic because so much of the instruction is asking you to pay attention, which you can't do. So I can't pay attention. I didn't get the reading piece. I don't get the reading piece. I pay less attention. And so what happens for those kids is that everybody notices that they don't pay attention and they sort of zone in on that. Oh, if your child only paid attention. But even if he was paying attention, he would still struggle, or she would still struggle to learn to read. So we need to work on both of those skills simultaneously. At Sterling, we do that by using an Orton-Gillingham program, and all of our students receive either one-on-one or one-on-two reading every day.
So what is Orton-Gillingham?
Okay, so Orton and Gillingham were, Orton was a psychologist and Anna Gillingham was an educator. And in the 1920s, they developed a program to work on what they then know, in that era was known as word blindness, which is what they called dyslexia. And the program was an integrated program that looks at direct, sequential, multisensory education. So what you're looking at is the structure of English. So I don't know about you guys, but I can remember in school being told, oh, that one's an exception. This is an exception. That's an exception. Oh, that doesn't work. And so that doesn't work for dyslexic kids because they've got nothing to hang their hat on, essentially. There's nothing to cue them to remember. So what Orton-Gillingham does is it does the opposite. It works on all those things that work first, which is about 80% of the language. Working from that I'm never going to give you something to read that I haven't taught you first. And building from one skill to the next with a lot of looped practice. Because what you're looking to develop is automaticity. You're going to start out teaching a child to sound out a word, but I don't want him spending, until he's 27 looking at cat going cat. I want him to be able to look at it and just say cat. So eventually you have to integrate. And so Orton uses both kinesthetic, auditory, visual cues to help the child begin to integrate so that it begins to stick in memory. And so for a lot of the kids, they may know it, they may recognize it, I can't recall it. Or I know it today and I can't recall it tomorrow. So there's a lot of overlearning that has to take place for most dyslexic kids. The good thing is that once they finally get it, because they're bright kids, they can use it. My issue for a lot of the students, and Lindsay was talking about that before, is that by the time they get to us, they have a lot of issues that revolve around not having been able to read and their feelings about that and some of the insensitive comments that people have made to them. Many of these kids have been told they're lazy. Many of these kids think they're stupid. My son told me for most of 3rd grade that he was stupid. And when I told him one day that I knew he wasn't stupid because I'd had him tested, my bright child said to me, but you're my mommy and you love me, so you're supposed to tell me that. Okay, when I asked him recently, my son will be 29 in a week, whether he really thought he was stupid, what he said to me was, no, I really knew I wasn't, but school made me feel that way. And that is a terrible thing in the life of a child because When I feel stupid, I don't take any risk. When I feel stupid, I don't put myself out there. When I feel stupid, I don't volunteer for anything. And so my biggest concern about his dyslexia was not dealing with the dyslexia, because I knew I could do that. It was dealing with all the rest. How do you teach your child to feel competent as a learner again? And because dyslexic kids often have a very complicated, uneven profile, how do I keep their strengths while I'm working on their weaknesses? And that's so important, because it's their strengths they're going to use in adulthood. Okay? I'm an undiagnosed dyslexic adult. Okay, I turned 65 last Monday. Nobody in my era knew anything about dyslexia. My second grade teacher told my mother that she didn't think Dick and Jane were working for me and that she should try something else. I learned to read on Peterson's Guide to American Birds because somebody said to my mother she needs to do something that would interest her, and it needs to be really repetitive. And I was interested in birds, so I went bird walking with this group of women. I was the only kid on Saturday morning on Long Island. You saw the same birds every week, right? And I wanted to know what they were looking up in their book. There was the motivation, right? I kept looking up the same words, and eventually it clicked. But, you know, for a lot of kids, they're going to need help for that to happen. And I knew, my father used to say to me, don't worry, you'll have a secretary when you grow up. He never lived long enough to see it come in a box and be a computer, and okay? Because I can remember my 8th grade teacher saying to me, close your eyes and see your spelling words in your forehead. And I can remember to this day thinking, that lady must have a really weird forehead. There aren't any words in mine. What is she talking about? Okay? Now, I know today I'm not a visual learner. But I didn't know that as an 8-year-old. And that was the only way we were taught. So, what was I supposed to do? I didn't learn to spell until I was an adult learning OG. That's when I finally learned to spell. I just kind of got the global look of those words, and I put them down. And even in college, I look back at notes, and schedule is spelt with a K. You know, it is what we hear. So I would not want to be the person who had to exist on my weaknesses as an adult. You don't want your kid to have to do that. So you want to fill in the weaknesses in that profile, but you want to continue to pull up the strengths. That's just really important so that they have those other areas of expertise to use as adults. Because that's what makes, because dyslexics bring a lot as adults. They're really good out-of-the-box thinkers. They're often very creative. They bring a lot, but you have to get them to the point where they're comfortable enough with themselves to use it. And unfortunately, that's where I see our schools failing. That they're just not doing that. Either they're only looking at the deficits and not doing a great job at that, or they're, you know, you get a lot of today, oh, they can just use a pen, or they can just use a calculator, or they can use voice to text. And there's just a lot of, oh, let's just let them accommodate their way around actually learning to read. And I just don't think it works.
So let's say you're a parent and instinctually you feel something's not right with your child, okay, in terms of your child not acquiring literacy at the rate that he or she should. Now, the school tells you, okay, everything's fine. Everything's fine. Don't worry. Don't worry. Now, panel, what would you advise that parent?
I would be telling that parent to go see a neuropsychologist.
So you think the first step you would say would be to see a neuropsychologist?
Well, okay, let's
Yeah.
put some things out there.
Yeah.
You've seen your doctor.
Yeah.
You know, there's not a medical issue going on. You've seen the optometrist. The kid isn't, I can't see at all. Although, as my reading specialist, you know, as my reading people put it to me, blind children learn to read, deaf children don't. Think about that, because reading is about language. It's not about vision. But if you really can't see, that's going to impact you, okay? You've ruled out those things. Then I think you have to say, well, why isn't my child thriving in school? And you know, you can see somebody for an academic evaluation, you could go work with a tutor, you can do you can do those things, and that may be the right thing. But I think at that, you still have to say to yourself, okay, am I gonna check in with that tutor in 3 months? And if that tutor says, you know, I've got concerns, then that's the point to say, I need to find out why. Because if the professional you hired is saying, this isn't going the way I thought it should, you know, then you need more.
So let's say a parent does go down that path and they set up an appointment with a neuropsychologist, they can't be seen for a few months. And then maybe Chantal, let's say they connect with you and they're wondering what they can do with their current school situation. They don't know, they don't know the results yet of the neuropsychological evaluation, but here, you know, I've got my child in the school, what can I do at this point?
Well, I always feel that it's important to start with your current school. You know, you need to partner with your school. You need to show that you're connected to them and that you want to resolve the challenges your child is facing. And so, and you'd be surprised how much support they can provide you. And look, it's not always perfect, but they will sit down with you and they will show you the testing that they've done, and they will say, okay, well, let's add in a little reading. And this could happen before you even have an IEP, before you requested, you've gone, you know, it takes time to get this evaluation and it takes time to have it written up, right? But it's also it gives you time to assess what's going on at school as well. And so I like it when families try to at least bring it to the attention of the current class team to see what do they recommend. Is there any additional, are there additional resources at school? In private schools, right through elementary school, they have small groups for learning, they have small groups for reading, and when they transition, as we were talking before, from learning to read to reading to learn, those supports get gently pulled away. So schools will at that point come to you and say, we just don't teach how to read anymore. And this may not be the right place for Johnny, because we're reading science texts and we're reading about American history and he's not understanding. But they will have opportunities to intervene with you as a parent and say, you know, we have these small learning groups, we have these small reading opportunities, we have small math groups, and let's try to see if that helps. And that's up to you as the parent to use those resources, but also to monitor how well your child is doing within a few months. And I don't think that's the end all. I think that having, putting in as much support as you can financially, I mean, these are financial endeavors as well, maybe having a tutor come or a learning specialist meet with your child once or twice a week just to bolster his skills. But I think that also helps with his confidence. As soon as he sees that he's able to achieve certain things and that gap isn't growing as much as it could be in the classroom, he may feel more confident and take some of those risks that Ruth, so astutely pointed out are necessary for him to be a confident learner. And so I think starting with your current school, and of course you graduate from there.
Right. I think when I said go for a neuropsych, I was thinking about the parent who's already using whatever the school is offering and still is feeling my child isn't progressing. There are also summer programs that are out there, and for some parents that's a great way of taking a look at what's going on with your child, because it's a different learning environment. It's often a very small learning environment, and it often can stem some of the loss that sometimes takes place over the summer, so they're more prepared for the following grade. It depends on how big that deficit is, how severe is their problem with uptake. Those are all things that's what a neuropsychologist sort of can look at for you. Is this something that is going to most likely respond to some after-school tutoring? Is this something that maybe going to a summer camp program that has a literacy component to it will help? Or is this a child who's going to really need more of a full-time environment?
So John, when do parents knock on your door?
we see parents, so just a little bit of background about my practice and what we do. I'm a special education litigator. I work with the parents of special needs kids, not just kids with dyslexia, but we see a lot of kids who do have dyslexia. And they come to us when they're not really getting what they want from the public school. And that can take a lot of forms, but generally the way it sort of looks when they come to us is that they've tried to get services, sort of push in, pull out services, additional hours with a teacher from their public school, and either the public school isn't giving them enough support, or they've reached the end of what they can give them, and there's still not really the progress that the parent wants to see. And so the parent comes to me and says, how do I, what are my next steps? A lot of what we do is called tuition reimbursement. So a parent of a special needs child will send their kid to a private special education school like the Sterling School and ask the DOE, the Department of Ed, or their local school district if they're outside New York City, to pay for the cost of the tuition. Because, essentially from the parent's perspective, the school needs to educate their child for free in the public school system. And if they're unable to, they should be made whole. They should be put in the same place as every other parent who has a neurotypical child who's sort of able to get educated for free in the public school system. So that's a lot of the, again, I think it's a really important thing that has to happen, and an important mechanism. And that's generally when we see parents walk through our doors. Sometimes they come to us as the first stop, and they say, I know I'm not really getting what I need to for my child. I don't really know where to start. Can you help point me in the right direction? Mm-hmm. And that is great for us to see. We're happy to be sort of a resource hub for parents. I think all the parents who are here are doing the exact right thing, because what I say to parents is, information is your friend. Get as much information about as many different programs as you can. Learn about the diagnostics. But then a lot of the times, when a parent comes to us and they don't really know what they want, we tell them to figure that out. And a lot of the time, the way they do that is by getting a neuropsychological evaluation, or figuring out, going to visit schools, figuring out what school is right for their child.
So going back to the neuropsychological evaluation, so let's say family is told neuropsychological evaluation. Now, can they go to the Board of Ed and say, hey, I want a neuropsychological evaluation?
So, yeah, I from our perspective, they can get a psychoeducational evaluation, but they're not going to get one that's very high quality. And, just to touch on sort of what we were describing and what we were talking about before, which is the difference between a private neuropsychological evaluation and one that the DOE does for free, is that the DOE evaluators will almost never put recommendations for the type of program that they want to see the child in.
Why is
at the end.
Why is that?
I'm not exactly sure why. I have my own suspicions. Like the real cynical part of me says that their boss is the principal of the school or somebody at the school district, and the boss is never going to want the evaluator to say, oh, the child needs an educational setting that we can't provide in our school, because I think it looks bad for school districts to have kids fleeing and going to private schools, and it also has money coming out of the DOE's litigation budget if their own evaluators are recommending outside programs that sort of the DOE can't fill themselves.
So let's say a family gets really frustrated and says, you know what, I'm going the private route. They see a private neuropsychologist. The private neuropsychologist says, yes, your child is dyslexic. Okay. Now that it's in writing, what rights does a family have now that they have in writing? Says, look, I have an evaluation, and the conclusion is my child has dyslexia. What do they do next?
Well, so the rights don't actually come from the neuropsychological evaluation. The rights are given to children by a federal law called the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act. It's often called the IDEA, and it's been kicked around with a bunch of different names since the 1950s. But essentially, one of sort of the bedrock.
Can you repeat that name again?
Yeah, it's called I'll say it slow, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act. or it's often called the IDEA or IDEA. And it's a federal law that guarantees every child with a learning disability the right to a free and appropriate public education.
In the least restrictive environment.
Yes, in the least restrictive environment.
Which is often called FAPE.
Yes, yeah, so
Lots of
may,
acronyms.
yeah, you may hear me spouting some jargon. I'll try and filter it out myself before it comes out of my mouth. But if I ever say, things like IEP instead of individualized educational program, or FAPE instead of free appropriate public education, raise your hand and let me know. But yeah, so the short of it is that a parent can use a neuropsychological evaluation as a justification of why a private special ed school is the appropriate setting. But the rights actually come from the federal law. The federal law saying kid is entitled to a free, appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment.
So, all right, so they have the neuropsych evaluation results. So, but I'm still trying to understand, navigate this dance between the law and the report. So what would you advise a family to do so that the law hopefully is supporting them, or maybe the interpretation of the evaluation, or am I not understanding?
Yeah, so
that?
that's a really good question.
Okay.
And I think, one that a lot of parents have. It's because the report is it fulfills two functions. It's sort of a diagnostic tool to tell the parent about their child and help them make an informed decision about where the child needs to go and how the child needs to learn. But it's also a legal document. It can be used by a lawyer as evidence before a judge, when they are actually going through the litigation process, suing the Department of Ed. There's a judge on that case, and the judge will look, it's not enough for a lawyer to say, hey, I think this kid needs a private special ed school. The judge wants it backed up by a sort of an independent diagnostic report. And
So what does the judge look at? I mean, so the judge obviously will see the diagnosis, and then what else will the judge look at in the report in terms
Yeah.
of
yeah, so
okay.
yeah,
Okay.
the history of sort of if you want to speak about the history.
Well, I mean, in terms of what the public school has offered and what they've actually tried and how the family has reacted, it's my understanding that that's really important in terms of whether the parent says, absolutely not, public school's not for my kid, I'm going to go right to the attorney and I'm going to say that my kid needs special ed. There's a bit of a delicate dance with
And
regard
that's
to
Yeah.
that.
Right.
I think it's really important for parents.
The other thing is you must give that document to the Board of Education. You can't,
And how do you
keep it secret and then show up later with it and say, oh, I want to use this.
But who do you give it to at the Board of Ed?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, if
yeah.
your child has had an IEP,
Uh-huh.
then you would put in writing that you're requesting a new IEP meeting
Okay.
because you have new information.
So when they say reopen the IEP, is
Right.
that's what
You'd
it is?
be reopening it.
Okay.
If you have never had an IEP,
Right,
you would
right.
be requesting
Right.
an IEP in writing
Right.
to CSE.
Okay.
And I would suggest to every parent here that when you submit something, anything to the Department of Ed, put a date stamp on it. I don't care if you go in the school's office and you say, can you put that in the time slot thing that the teachers sign in on? Okay, but you need a date stamp. Because federal law has requirements as to in what time period the Department of Education must get back to you. And if you don't date stamp it, you've got no proof. So either send it, if you're gonna send it in, send it certified mail with a receipt and request, so that you have proof of when the Department of Ed received it. I mean, I wish I could say that you could act on trust, but you can't. Because they've got a team of lawyers, and they know every rule in the book, and you as a parent don't.
So worst case scenario, I don't know how often this happens. A family does this, they date stamp it, 10 business days expire, they don't hear back from the Board of Ed, then what happens?
So I think a good way to sort of imagine the scenario and explore this scenario is to understand how these cases play out in court, sort of what the test is. So at what point is a parent entitled to tuition reimbursement? So getting their tuition back if they've paid out tuition to one of these private schools. And the way a judge evaluates it is sort of like a three-part test. And the first part is, did the school district provide a program that's appropriate for this child? Did they provide this free, appropriate public education? If they didn't, let's say they're...
And who's supposed to document that? Let's say I'm a parent and my son is receiving, a literacy program. I have no idea that literacy program is appropriate for my son, right? So what am I supposed to do?
Well, I think you're looking at a lot of diagnostics at that point.
Okay.
So again, going back to your partnering with your school, you're going to keep tabs on how your child is progressing.
So is that the parent's responsibility?
It's everyone's responsibility.
It's everyone's
But I think the
responsibility.
parent has
Okay.
to drive the car here.
Okay.
And just like I never allow a parent to attend an IEP meeting without knowing what they want to achieve at that meeting.
Okay.
In other words,
So you actually go to the IEP meetings? Or?
I do.
You do,
with
okay.
my families.
Okay.
But
And I do with my families.
Okay.
But I think it's important that you attend an IEP meeting with a goal in mind. So they've been accepted to a school, they know what they want, they have documentation that points in the direction that the school has not been able to provide what that child needs, that perhaps the child has even regressed, that he's not progressing at the same rate as his peers, and that there are there are ways to document that your child is not feeling great about himself, that he's frustrated, that he doesn't want to go to school anymore, that he's emotionally distraught because he can't keep up with his peers.
So in
And
other words,
all of that.
should families almost have like a diary where they're just
Yes.
logging in and
Yes.
and
They should.
does that help in court? Or?
That helps your
Yeah,
attorney.
that definitely does help in court.
Okay.
A lot of my clients that I work with, I say, get a composition notebook or a spiral notebook. Every time you have a phone call, every time you have a letter that comes in, just one sentence about it. The date, what it was, what happened. And the time at which that comes into play is when a lawyer like me, who's been working behind the scenes with the parents, sort of guiding them through the process and staying hidden for a lot of it, suddenly sort of pulls aside the veil and says, this parent is retained by a lawyer, and we've written up a complaint. These are all the ways in which you violated this child's rights. And the remedy for that is that the parent has unilaterally placed a child in a private special education school. And that's sort of what starts the legal process. A lot of parents, or a lot of people who engage a lawyer will come to them after something bad has happened. Like let's say you go to a personal injury lawyer after a car accident. For a parent of a special needs child, a lot of the time, the IEP meeting, for lack of a better word, can seem like the car accident. But they can work with a lawyer before that happens to sort of make sure they do everything right. So for example, using the same analogy, they have their seatbelt buckled, they were using their turn signal, and then they're not at fault by missing any deadlines, by forgetting any dates, by not recording anything. And they can really demonstrate to the judge when it gets there the ways that they have followed the rules and the DOE has not. And that makes for a very strong case.
So just kind of summarizing where we're at so far in this process. So as Chantal was mentioning, one, you should partner with the school, right? A parent should be as proactive as possible, right? You should document, right? Everything that happens along the way. You should not wait for that car wreck, but if you're starting to notice something's not right, you should also start that process as well. Now, what if you're dealing with an antagonistic school where they're just like, no, we don't want to listen to you, we don't want to have meetings with you, your son or daughter is doing okay, you're a crazy parent, it's all in your head. Like, we have other things to worry about.
And I think that your response to that as a parent can look really different if you want to stay in the school or if you want to go into a different school. If you want to stay in the school, you will be dealing with repeat players. You will have to deal with these administrators and these teachers over and over again, and your kid will have to see them every day. So you can't really burn it down. You can't really sort of essentially try to vindicate your child's rights, and in doing so, sort of wreck all communication with them. But I think And I have a lot less experience with that, with that scenario, because by the time a parent comes to me, they're usually looking at a private special ed school already. They've tried to engage with the public school, and they can't. And I think maybe Chantal can speak to that scenario better.
So what I think is important also is that you're bringing it to the attention of the school periodically, that you're starting to build a case, right? And you're saying, well, Johnny's not progressing at the rate we'd like. We've been kicking in all this private support after school, and he's still unhappy, and he still feels like he's behind his friends.
Just to jump in, so are you telling this to the teacher, or are you learning the administration?
Yes, this is during a parent-teacher conference.
Okay.
This could be during an IEP meeting, when you're regrouping to review whether a child continues to meet the needs for a specialized program, an ICT class, or services. So you can have these discussions at different intervals, but you've already done your work. You've already done your legwork. You're looking at other schools. You, as a parent, have committed and understand that your child needs something that's different. What do they need that's different? They need a smaller class, perhaps. They need more attention. They need the kinds of instruction that will be responsive to the way they learn and to directly attend to their needs. They need to be in an environment where that could be calm. Sometimes students can't learn in a class of 32 children, even if it's an ICT class and you have two competing lessons going on at the same time. I was just observing a class that I honestly thought I was going crazy because I couldn't hear anything. I was trying to listen to one lesson, and the lesson in the back of the room was so distracting. So, I think there has to be a step in my heart. I believe there has to be a step between an ICT class and going to a special ed private school, but there isn't. And so as parents, we have, and I say we because I've done this myself. My son went to 5 different schools before he got to high school, and I kept pulling him out from one environment to the next because each time he was getting what he needed, and suddenly we were monitoring him very closely, and suddenly he wasn't. He had risen to the occasion and he needed to move on to higher ground. So we kept moving and moving. So 5 different schools, and when he finally got to high school, he said, "Mom, can I stay here a while? Because I'm tired of moving around so much." But it's what you do as a parent of a special needs child or a child who has any kind of learning challenges. You need to be able to understand when they've reached the maximum of what they can receive of support in a particular environment, and when it's time to look at something else and move on. And of course, having those evaluations done periodically, every 2 to 3 years, is very helpful. I know that is, especially when you're ready to make that transition to another school, having that evaluation can really clarify what the plan should be, what type of environment you should be looking at, and what your child's continued needs are.
So just taking a step back to something I was talking about previously. So let's say you have a child who has an IEP, and then the parents realize they're not getting the services they need. They seek a neuropsychological evaluation, they reopen the IEP, and then they let the school know we'd like to reopen the IEP. How long is that process in terms of getting that ball moving, so then you can have another IEP meeting so those IEP goals can be adjusted? And then the other piece, which I want to open up to the panel, is the importance of having well-written IEP goals.
Okay, see, I disagree.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't think if you're keeping your child in the public school, then the IEP goals make sense. When a child's in my school, I don't care what the IEP goals say.
Okay, what is that?
Because it's not my environment that they're writing them for.
Okay.
So therefore, they're usually completely irrelevant.
Okay.
The only thing I care about on an IEP is the management goals.
Okay. So what does that mean, management?
The management goals are, what does your child need to learn? Not what are they going to learn? Because in a way, a goal is a wish. It's, I'd like to see your child, I love the ones where the child's reading at kindergarten and then the writing goal says that the child will write a paragraph. Well-developed 5-paragraph essay with an introductory sentence and a conclusion. Okay, that's a wish for an LD child. What's not a wish for an LD child is that, and you can get this on an IEP, is that they need multisensory direct instruction across the curriculum. Okay, now, You take that IEP back to the classroom, now you've got something to say to that teacher for that school or that program that the Department of Ed recommended, and say, how are you going to do that?
So is it just, okay, so this is a great
Because
point.
the IEP is a
Right.
legal mandate.
Right.
So whatever you get on the IEP,
Right.
they have to be able to tell you how they're actually going to do. So they will not use the word, even though they now can legally. New York State passed a law that said dyslexia now can show up on your IEP, not as a classification, but as a description. So if you can get them to put that word on there, that gives you more power to demand that they then use research-based methodology that is being proven to be effective with kids with dyslexia, okay? If I can say that if the child needs scaffolding, they need looping, they need repetition, they need to be taught at their own pace, they need direct sequential multisensory instruction across the curriculum, now my parent can go with that letter of placement to the ICT class that they've been told to go to, present that IEP and say, how are you going to do that? When the school says, I have no idea, then they handed Mark his case. I mean, and I wish I could say that more often than not, the school goes, oh yes, we can do that. In which case the parent can say, okay, how? Because I've heard things like, well, we use videos occasionally. Okay, so, the parent does need to know what their child needs, but those needs are what's really driving the IEP, because in reality, it's those needs of how you teach that are going to get those goals met. The goal itself is a lovely idea in reality. It should give the teacher some guidance. It should be realistic, but most of the goals that I see in New York City on IEPs are, I had one yesterday. Child will be able to read book with comprehension at 80%. She's laughing. What book? What grade level? Right? So that goal, anybody could meet, because it doesn't mean anything. If you want to look at how IEPs are supposed to be written, look on Peter Wright's website on Wright's Law, and look under his SMART definition of what a federal IEP is supposed to have. 90% of New York IEPs do not. My favorite IEP goal was that the child would be able to throw with 85% accuracy from a free throw line on a basketball court. It was a PT goal. And I thought, well, if the child could do that, he could be in the Knicks, and we wouldn't be having this discussion. So, I'm less concerned with what they write for goals and much more concerned about getting those management needs on there. Because it's the management needs you can hold them accountable for.
So going back, so this is multi-layered. So going back to the management needs. All right, so let's say if families are, all right, I want to make sure that my child's management needs are being met, okay? So 2 questions. One, the school can't meet those needs and they come to you, so what happens? And then the second piece is how do you word on the IEP that those management needs need to be there for the child? Like, who helps the family get those management needs met just on paper, right? Because once it's on paper, right, then legally you say, hey, right?
Well, it should be in the neuropsych. I mean, the management needs.
Oh, so it should be in the neuropsych. Okay.
Yeah, in the summary
Okay.
of the neuropsych, it should tell you
Okay.
what your child needs.
And the Board of Ed you said they don't do that. Okay, so the Board of Ed doesn't discuss the management needs.
There are management
Okay.
needs on the IEP.
Okay.
There is a section for management needs on the IEP.
In the IEP or in the evaluation?
Where on the IEP is that? I'm sorry.
I don't know what page it is.
It's usually in the top in the first page.
Yeah,
Sorry?
there's-
Yeah,
Is
management
it the
needs.
first page?
There should be a section that's just
That
dedicated to
says
management needs.
And it's usually really small.
Very small.
Yeah, so it's your job as a parent to make it not small. Here's your goal. Your goal is to make it say things that are more specific to your child and less like, child needs extra time. That's a management need. It's not a particularly specific management need. Okay? And then I would say that there's a difference between management needs and test accommodations. And sometimes the way the person looking at it from the DOE may be saying that those are both the same. And they're not. The test modification only involves state testing or classroom testing. So test modifications might be things like you can have spelling requirements removed from a child's grading of a state test. Now, I've been told that you can't, but it's on the state's drop-down menu, so yes, you can, regardless of whether the person on your IEP team knows that. You can have grammar removed. You can obviously get extra time, 1x, 2x time. You can ask for a separate location, a quiet room. Okay, those are test accommodations. But if your child needs that every day in the classroom, then that needs to be specified as a management need. So if, on that IEP, if you need to say that you want a reduction in your child's spelling load every week, you know, maybe your kid is not the kid who can do 20 words. Maybe they'd succeed if they were only responsible for 5. Right? Now the classroom teacher is not going to offer that because it's more work for her, let's be real. You know, but you can ask for it. Whether they'll do it, you know, that's kind of where this dance between what's legal, what's accountable, and what you can get happens, because you are better off asking for it and being rejected from an attorney's standpoint than not asking for it, because then you can't prove that they wouldn't give it to you. Does that make sense?
And to put sort of another point on the nuance of it, so let's say you don't ask for it and they don't give it to you. If it's recommended on the neuropsychological evaluation, as a lawyer, I can argue you read the neuropsych, you went through it, you're supposed to have included pretty much all of the findings as at least a justification for talking about it all. The fact that you, the Committee on Special Education, didn't raise it yourselves is itself a violation of the child's rights, and the child should be given this on their IEP. So just the fact that it's not on your child's IEP, that there isn't that something is missing, doesn't mean that, you know, your child isn't entitled to it. As a lawyer, we can argue, you know, the IEP is wrong. The IEP is invalid, and the construction of the IEP and the way it's written is itself a violation of the child's right to a free and appropriate public education, regardless of whether the local school can implement it.
So let's say I go home, I look at my child's IEP, and I look at the management needs section, like, oh my God, this is kind of pathetic, right? Then do you then reopen the IEP again? Like, what's the next step?
In order to reopen an
Yeah.
IEP, you have to have new data,
Okay.
so new information. So that
Okay.
can be like just time that has passed and you as a parent are seeing your child's grades not improve, or you can do it, you know, using an updated neuropsychological evaluation, maybe new testing data, and even without any of that stuff, the IEP needs to be revisited at least every 12 months.
Okay.
You can also get related service providers to update their testing, or to perform, if you need to have a speech and language therapist evaluation, that also will allow you to reopen the case.
Now, can they go the private route, or should they seek somebody within the school system to provide that
So
data?
that's gotten very tricky over the years. That's a question that used to be a private evaluator was recognized, and now I'm seeing we have to use our evaluator. So the IEP process can be sort of a mix of different players. So you could have your own private neuropsych evaluation, but the DOE or the Committee on Special Education will really require that they provide the OT eval and the speech and language evaluations, and also for counseling purposes. They want to use their providers. And again, those evaluations do not have any recommendations on them in terms that are helpful.
So what would happen, let's say you're a parent, you have your private neuropsych, the Board of Ed has their OT, their speech. You say, you know what, I want a second opinion. I want a private OT, private speech. Now you have, it's like, here's my data, here's your data, right? And then you got this little, I guess maybe, I don't know, fight or whatever going on. So then what happens?
The short answer is that the CSE is going to make the decision that it wants to make. You know, a lot of the time, that can even though it's not supposed to be dictated by what kind of classroom availability they have, you know, it's just supposed to be tailored to the child's needs. sometimes that trickles into the decision, and no matter if you as a parent have really great data that says otherwise, they're going to put your child in an ICT classroom with sets, but that's not really where you can vindicate your rights. So that your child's rights have been violated there, yes, and nothing you're really going to do is going to change their mind, because a lot of the time it's been made up by that point. It was made up when they figured out the school budget for that year. And where, if that's the case, no amount of sort of either emotion or logic is going to get them to change what it says on that IEP. And that's when you need to start thinking about what are my other options. That's what it looks like when you've gone as far as you can in a particular school and you need to look somewhere else.
It might help if I explain how Sterling started. That might
Yes,
help somebody.
please, thank you.
My son was in 3rd grade. I had told the school district at the end of 1st grade that I was fairly sure that he was dyslexic. Wasn't a surprise, my husband is, and as I said, I was never diagnosed, so you get 2 people who have dyslexia, there's a really good chance that the kid does too. And his kindergarten teacher said to me, I'm really concerned that he doesn't know all the numbers. She said to me, because they're up on the wall of the classroom. And he wasn't learning to read. And this was a child who, at 2, his first spoken sentence was, we were in the city, I was actually dropping paperwork off at the Orton conference, and my husband's car got cut off. It was March, it was snowing, and I hear this little voice in the back seat, Daddy, maneuver the car carefully, please. Okay? So his teacher could not figure out why he could not read. It's that unexpected, right, kid who's clearly dyslexic. And so they said, well, we'll give him at-risk resource room. So that was 2nd grade. The end of 2nd grade, they said, we think we should we think we should do an IEP meeting and see if he needs to be classified. Okay, so we go through that. They continue at-risk resource room in 3rd grade. Last day of school, his teacher calls me and she says to me, the district's gonna call you tomorrow, they're gonna tell you something you won't like, and she hung up. District calls the next day, and they said, your son didn't pass the state reading test. Me, I'm like, big surprise. So we think that he should go to summer school from 9 to 11 in the month of July, and we'll retest him on the state reading test August 1st. Think about that. And if he passes, then he can go to 4th grade. I said, okay, let me understand this. Now, at the time, I was running the reading program at the State College of Optometry Learning Disability Youth. I was not running Sterling. Let me think about this for a minute. So you've had him from kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade. You still haven't taught him to read, but he's magically going to learn to read in the month of July. So let's assume that that's not going to happen. What's your plan? Well, we'll hold him over in 3rd grade, and now we'll make his resource room official, because it won't be at risk anymore. I said, okay, so how's that going to be different than the one that was at risk? It's still the same person doing it who doesn't believe in phonics. And what are we doing about math and science that he's good at? Oh, he'll do those over again. I said, so help me to understand that my son is not going to learn to read and be bored to death. So I was in the College of Optometry talking with a bunch of parents, just venting how frustrated I was, when a couple of parents said to me, whatever you do, we do, which is how Sterling started. But my point to that story is they didn't have an answer. They didn't have ICT then. It wouldn't have been an answer for him anyway. There just was no answer for that bright dyslexic kid. And unfortunately, very often there still isn't. I wish I could say that 20 years later things had changed. As I said, my son is now, he'll be 29 in a week. He is majored in college in network security, so he was good at science and math. All right? He works for the Department of the Air Force. So dyslexic kids can have very successful adult lives, but that wouldn't have happened if I allowed them to hold him over in 3rd grade, not teach him to read, and then made him feel stupid in the things that he was good at as well.
Just because of the time, we're going to shift gears very soon. So we've been, this discussion is mostly focused on how, what parents should do, and we have a lot of educators here as well. So my next question is, if you're an educator, you're working in a school system, how would you empower these professionals to, one, maybe identify that some of these kids that they work with in the classroom might have maybe dyslexia, or they need something that's above and beyond, which the school can provide? How can a professional maybe put some pressure on the school, maybe have a conversation with the school, saying, well, maybe, the reading intervention that we're using, I've noticed maybe is not heavily based in phonics. Maybe, it doesn't have a lot of evidence behind the reading program that we're using. So what would be some advice for those teachers that do work with these kids day in and day out, where maybe the parent doesn't know that their child is struggling, maybe the parent doesn't want to know that their child is struggling, and maybe this teacher is the one who has to kind of start that conversation?
Teachers in the public school system have the power to request a referral, so request an initiation of the IEP process. Doing that without parents' consent is pretty much impossible. The parent needs to consent to the evaluation process and whatever services the child is given, during the IEP meeting. So I think it is really an uphill battle if the parent is not on board. But if you are a public school teacher, you have the ability to sort of work within your school to at least begin that process where you have the conversation with the parent and you say, something's not going exactly right, it doesn't seem to be going according to plan, we're trying to figure out why, and for example, first we want an evaluation and then we want to consider having an IEP meeting. That's, for a public school teacher, that is one route to go.
Mm-hmm. I would say, first of all, New York State is currently considering, it is not going to make it on the committee this year, hopefully it will next, adding to the dyslexia bill that was passed last year, which would authorize screening for all kindergarten students. There is a quick screener online, it takes about 10 minutes. You can download a free dyslexia screener for I think it's 4 and 5-year-olds. So that's, you could, as a public school teacher, say, you know what? I'm going to do that in my class, and then I'm going to have a little evidence to say to this parent that I think your child's showing some signs that concern me. The other thing is, I think that teachers can push their principals for professional development that deals with how do I add into my classroom work, particularly those teachers who are kindergarten 1 and 2, things that are phonology based. Things that you probably didn't learn in grad school, I hate to say it, but about the actual teaching of reading, not about reading. But what do I need as a teacher to understand about vowels, consonants, and how English goes together? There are online programs. Lexia is a really good one that you can buy a copy of and use in your classroom, so that you can maybe give that child who is somewhat behind some of the other students a pair of earphones and some private time on a computer to work on some of those phonological skills. I think those are things that most teachers probably could get their principals to support. Lexia is like $85, so it's, if you have choice money, you can afford it.
So let's say, again, you're a teacher and you want to provide the best for your students. Are you legally allowed to say, hey, I'm going to bring in this intervention to the school so I can help a few of my students?
Depends on the principal.
Yeah, every one of the public schools is run like their own entity.
Got it.
New York
Okay.
is not an adoption state, so
Mhm.
even though Esther Klein-Friedman's presiding over a $7 million budget to bring foundations, for instance, a decent OG-based program to the schools, if without an adoption principle, meaning you got to do this because this is what we're doing, people don't have to make changes to the usually very spotty foundational skill training that they have
Exactly.
in grad school. So this is a big, big problem. The material's there, the spending is there, but without a concerted effort to get a whole school on board, it's not going to happen.
And to
Do a
integrate it.
screening in a minute and
Right.
get some data that you can use to support the idea that, this little one has phonemic awareness deficits. Or, this kid can't do rapid naming, we really need to pay attention now. Kindergarten now.
The other thing is that in New York City, what I see a lot of is that Fontes Pinnell has become used as if that was a reading level.
And then more is the same, right? So somebody goes to resource room and then they're going to get a double dose.
Right, but it isn't. If you go onto Fontes and Pinnell's website and you read what they say about themselves, they are a graded book. They're not a reading level. They were meant to grade books, to put reading levels to material so that a classroom teacher could easily select a book that was appropriate for a child. Because they practice reading the books, you can't then say, because he mastered this book after he's read it 5 times, that he now moved up to the next level and his reading level went up. Because that level is not transferable to any other book that's not part of Fontes Pinnell, or that's not part of the book that he was practicing.
And their own remedial program doesn't help you, it's a double dose of the same stuff.
So, that's part of the problem too, is that the language that people use to say that a kid is, parents I think are often very surprised when they have a neuropsych done, that the reading level that it comes out that their child is reading at may be very, very different from what the school has been telling them, and that's because the school is using Fontes Pinnell as if it was a reading level.
It's an immensely subjective assessment.
Yeah, and also isn't looking at any skills.
Yeah.
Well, at the end of the day, as parents, you can place your child wherever you want them to go, right? The DOE doesn't have to pay for it. They can decide that we can provide for your child in our public school system, but the parents can do what they want with their child. And when you're sitting at an IEP meeting, the first thing that they'll go over is your rights, and they'll tell you, if they're a good team, they'll tell you you have certain rights and you should understand them. This is a meeting and we're discussing what we can provide here. And I think it's so important for the parents to attend that meeting and to also listen to what's being offered, but show their concern about what's being offered. And to make sure that's documented in some form. The neuropsych reads that my child needs a small class. He's 2 years behind in reading. Your program here only deals with phonics instruction. It doesn't carry over into your writing program. It doesn't carry over into your math program. How will you be addressing that? Bring all these things up at your meeting, because it's important to go on record for saying these things so that when the lawyers take over, they'll have a lot of information to work with and to help you get what you want.
And even if you don't have the ability to have them record it, it can be as simple as sending yourself an email with some notes in it after, with the subject line, IEP meeting 4/3/19. That way you have it, you made it right after the meeting, and you remember everything that happened. Pretty much everybody has a phone with them at all times. It's an easy way to just do it almost automatically so that very little gets lost in the translation.
I actually take notes the entire meeting, and I send those meeting notes directly to the family to review, and then they go right to you.
I sometimes suggest to parents that they send a thank you note to the team, but in that thank you note, they write, thank you so much for the time and and your obvious interest in my child. I'm so glad that we had this meeting. I want to reiterate what I understood about this meeting. I had these concerns. Despite those concerns, you suggested that my child remain in the ICT class that he's been in for the last year. I really thank you for your energy and for your, because what's going to happen to the thank you note is going to end up usually in your kid's file. And then when the attorney subpoenas the DOE's file, it's going to be in their file, not only in your notes. Because usually the thank you note gets filed. Nobody really reads them, they just file them. So it's a nice way of making the team feel respected. And then I always say to parents, you must, and I think all the attorneys on the panel will back me up, you must say whatever they recommend, I absolutely will go look at that, but I have concerns.
That's absolutely right.
If you do not say that you have concerns, a year later when you're in a hearing, somebody's gonna say, You didn't tell us you were unhappy about that. And if you don't say you'll go look at it, unfortunately, the third prong, which Mark didn't talk about, is looked at as the parents playing fair, for want of a better word, with the Department of Education. So if you don't go look at it, you're kind of not playing fair. It's like you weren't open to their suggestion, and that can be held against you.
That's exactly right. Yeah, we have a question over here.
So this system is flawed in New York State, I'll tell you that much, because my daughter just turned 8 on Valentine's Day. Now, I've always said, as a parent, I'm not a professional, but at 5 I said she was dyslexic. And it wasn't about her writing the letters backwards. You even have it in your slideshow. She wouldn't say animal, she would say aminal. She, diagonal for diagonal. And it was just, as a parent, you know when something's wrong. And since she was 2, I said it. And you have to continue to fight the Board of Ed and continue, because they say, no, her IQ is fine. She's smarter than a child her average age. And it's gotten to the point where I've literally gone after Board of Ed time and time to adjust her IEP. Her own school has provided the Orton Gillingham as much as they can, but they can't do it in the way that she needs it. Because at this point, she's in 2nd grade and can't read. But as a parent who is a single parent, who does work full-time, this is a whole nother full-time job in itself, and I can't afford a lawyer. I don't get a free advocate because I work. And then, so you have to sue the Board of Ed, you have to be able to get money for a lawyer, you have to be able to upfront this money for a private school, and all at the same time, your kid is suffering, and I'm to the point where I don't know how to help her. These kids aren't blind. My daughter knows that something is wrong. She knows she can't read, she knows it's not right, she knows that she's behind, she doesn't want to read, and who's to blame her? That's like somebody giving me a book in French. So at this point, what help can a parent have in fighting the Board of Ed, in getting them into private schools? Because I'm going to open houses, but these schools cost $60,000, $65,000 a year. And I understand why, they're private funded, it's understandable, but I can't afford a lawyer. I can't afford the school. So now my daughter's stuck in this middle area where I don't even know what to do with her.
Well, there are schools that are funded. For example, Churchill, which works with dyslexia.
Which I'm actually going to open house for.
Okay, good. That's a school that you should look at. It's a funded school. So there are schools that are funded, and then funded means that it's if you have non-public school placement on your IEP, then you're eligible to look at schools that are funded, and then it means that the DOE will pay for that school directly. You don't have to lay out the tuition.
It sometimes works backwards. I mean, in reality, it's very unusual to get the team to agree to put an NPS on the IEP.
But which makes
It
it
has
hard
become more
because I have to come up with
sometimes-
money.
Right, no, what
first.
sometimes works, though, is Churchill and Lowell and some of the approved schools will work the other way around. So they will give you a letter saying that they're accepting this child conditional upon the funding. Then you can take that with you to your IEP meeting, and when the IEP team knows you already have a seat, they are much more likely to be willing to put the NPS on.
Now, I only have one more question and then I'll leave
Okay,
you guys alone.
but there are
it's more
schools
for-
that can take you without, Mark can answer that better than I can, that can take you under Connor's provisions where you do not have to pay the tuition up front.
Well, the person in the CSC, because I had to go above and beyond, because you can never get anybody in the Board of Ed to do anything. I've asked with evaluations year after year, and then they say, oh no, we got a new person, so we didn't see that she needed an evaluation. In any case, the last IEP I had with them, the person from Board of Ed specifically said, we are giving her all the services we can possibly give her. She's in an integrated classroom. She has speech, she has reading, math, extra time. She gets 5 minutes because of the ADHD as well, because she has multi-sensory issues. And it's just at this point, what do I do? What steps do I need to take? Because I can't come up with the money and wait for Board of Ed to reimburse me. I can't come up with the lawyer's fee and wait for Board of Ed to come back for me.
So just to sort of piggyback on what Ruth began to say right before, is there are two different ways to sue for tuition reimbursement. The first is traditional reimbursement. The parent pays up front for the school tuition, and then they get paid back once they either settle or litigate with the Department of Ed. The other way is to get what's called a Connors seat. And not all schools do this, and you really have to talk with the admissions people at the school. But the way it works is that a parent starts to attend the school essentially on credit, with the understanding from the school that if they sue and they lose, the parent is still responsible for the cost of the tuition. So that is a way to sort of make it more democratic. At one point several years ago, the courts realized that, you know, it doesn't, not every parent in New York City has the ability to pay up front for a full year of tuition. And so there was this sort of ability to sue on credit recognized by the court, you know. And I think for a parent who can't afford to pay for a private school tuition year up front, but is still motivated and visiting schools, is to ask, you know, what is your policy on Connors funding? Do you have any Connors seats available? And it's called Connors because it's named after the court decision. That's the family. The Connors family was the first one to sue victoriously on credit in sort of one of these cases.
So my question is, I recently had my son evaluated by the Healthy Brain, so it was a research study, so it was a free evaluation. And I decided to go that route because last year we had my other son going through turning 5, so we paid for neuropsych for him. So my son is 9 and a half, he's in 4th grade, and everything you described in the beginning, my son meets completely. Like, he's in 4th grade, he didn't take the ELA test yesterday and today because he said, Mommy, I took the practice test and I was in the bathroom crying because I had so much anxiety from it. And his school is just the most unsupportive school to me. And since like kindergarten, I've had him evaluated through DOE for speech, never qualified for anything. So the evaluation came back and it was unconclusive. Like, he got a diagnosis with ADHD, but the learning disability, it's not there. It says he has to be reevaluated. Continuous revaluation, whatever. He scored average in a lot of areas. In certain areas, he scored a low average. Same thing, he's getting 3s, and his teacher's like, it's a rubric. Of course he is. Some things he does good on, other things he does poor, so he's getting 3s. I know his school's gonna come back and be like, he's getting 3s, he scored average in all these areas. The evaluation was very detailed in recommendations, like ridiculously detailed in recommendations. It almost didn't match what the results were in a way, but I'm afraid they're not going to give me an IEP. Last year I tried to get an IEP and they said no. The school even said to me recently that in order to get an IEP, you have to be 2 grades behind, which we all know is not true, and I called them out on it, and I said, show me in the IDEA where this says it.
Families.
I mean, it was awful.
Does he have a 504 plan?
No, but I don't know what to do. Is I have this report and I'm just concerned about what they're gonna come back and say. And so I know an option could be a 504, but I know he needs more than that. And his current teacher, he has AAS support, even though he's getting 3s because his teacher has identified that he needs help. He's getting a tutor. She has like a volunteer that comes into the classroom and helps him with writing. So he's getting both of those interventions now, but they're not enough. And it's interesting when he talked about like the reading level, he basically read like a little paragraph and she advanced him to the next reading level. So I know the schools, I can see all your expressions. I know the school is completely failing him. Do I have to go and now pay for a private neuropsych, another evaluation for this poor child? Like, I'm lost. I just need to get him an IEP, and I just know they will not do it based on, I don't think they're gonna do it based on this evaluation. And
Do you have a way to contact the evaluator?
I talked to her, and so when I met with her, she showed me where he's actually, what his reading level is, and it's like a 2.8, it's like 2nd grade level, and she was gonna put that in the report, and she said, because it's a research study, they couldn't. So I was like, why didn't anyone tell me this from the beginning? You know, so now I'm like kicking myself for doing this evaluation when I should have just sucked it up and paid for the private one, but like you said, it's hard.
You can actually, okay, so I know that you guys have things, but I've literally been doing this since she was 2. The only reason my daughter even got an IEP was because I had to prove she had epilepsy at the time, because they told me her IQ was too high. So that was one. A medical diagnosis can get
He
treated.
doesn't have that. He does have other health impairment because of the ADHD, which he just got the
A lot
diagnosis.
of places will tell you to pay out of pocket. I fought tooth and nail and did find doctors that will do an an evaluation through your insurance. I have gone to Jersey, to child development doctors and everything. So you can go out of state, and those out of state doctors can still document the same way and bring it back to New York State.
You might also try talking to your pediatrician
Mhm.
about her anxiety.
Him.
Because you don't really care why she gets an IEP.
Him.
Him, sorry.
That's okay.
You know, you don't care what the reason is that they finally grant you one.
Yeah.
You just leave.
But when doctors start talking about that kids are at risk for depression,
Oh, it's horrible. He tells me he's stupid.
well, that's
That's
what I'm saying.
awful.
But
Right.
I would try to get your
No, I know.
pediatrician
Yeah.
to write you something,
Right,
and then take that letter with you to that IEP meeting.
Right.
That along with this report, which might not have drawn the conclusions that you want, should work, because they're gonna grant the IEP based on what the pediatrician says, and then you can get the learning recommendations in from the report.
So what does the pediatrician need to say? I actually called her yesterday, and I have to call her.
Well, I would go have a meeting with your pediatrician and talk to the pediatrician about your child's anxiety, that he couldn't take the state test, that he ended up crying,
And he has an ADHD, you said.
that he has a diagnosis
He
of
just got-
ADHD,
That's one thing that
right, that he's coming
Something you
home
could hang out.
with, you know, feeling stupid, that his self-esteem is being negatively impacted, and that you think that he needs some special services, and can he write a letter to that extent? The doctor should know what needs to go on, one would hope.
And some doctors are just willing just to do it because they see it, you know.
Right.
When the Board of Ed told me no, she didn't need service, she wasn't even talking. And her own doctors were like, no, I'm gonna give you a prescription, you're gonna go outside and you're gonna find it, you know, so it's.
When I said the Healthy Brain Network, you guys all kind of.
Unfortunately, because I've seen a lot of reports this year that were done as part of this research study, and they all seem to have the same conclusion,
Which was?
ICT.
Oh, it said ICT, but
It's-
there were a ridiculous amount of recommendations,
Well, that's wonderful, though,
which is
because,
great.
because ICT is a classification that you would get from an IEP.
But the same school told me for my younger child that ICT is not a class. What you just said classification, right?
Well, it's a gen ed class
Yeah.
with a
Placement.
special ed component.
They tried to tell me it was a related service.
No,
And
No.
that he could have a separate special ed teacher for every single subject.
that's sense.
He does not go there, my younger son. And
well,
I thought-
every school does their ICT differently.
Yeah.
So there are schools where, yes, the special ed teacher changes out subject by subject. It's not the normal way in elementary school. Usually the special education teacher is there full-time. But how they run their ICT is really not the issue.
Yeah.
And you could ask to get your child into, if they have an ICT class, you could ask to get your child into the ICT as the gen ed child. I mean, the requirement under the law is 40%
Right, gen ed.
ICT, 60% not. So you could ask to get into that class as the 60%, as the child who doesn't have an IEP. Technically, the special ed teacher helps every child in that class, not just the ones with IEPs. So, you know, that might be one way to start that process, but I would ask your pediatrician to see if he can write a letter documenting the school anxiety, which should get you counseling and an IEP, I would think.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we only have time for one more question. And if possible, is there an educator who has a, great, thank you, Christine, thank you.
Quick question, mostly surface as a DOE. Can you, as an educator, can I mention dyslexia without an official diagnosis on the IEP? Or the student needs to get a neuropsych and get that official diagnosis?
The parent can.
So if the student needs an official diagnosis for dyslexia to be mentioned.
Well, for you as a representative of the DOE, I would think yes.
No.
Okay.
They denied
They
my
won't
learning
put
session.
dyslexia on the IEP.
But they're not allowed to. They're not allowed to put it as the classification. The state did not change the
Learning
13
disability.
classifications,
Yeah.
but they did change the, they made, let's put it this way, they didn't even change it because federal law always gave you that protection. They just made New York State law align with it. The chancellor's regs on the use of dyslexia on the IEP came out in July. I would download them and bring them to your supervisor and say, how are we as a school dealing with this? This is what the chancellor is saying.
But it's hard too, because my learning specialist, there was a learning specialist that was helping my daughter in the previous grade when she realized she was dyslexic herself. And she brought it up to
Right, but it's
board.
only been since July that the chancellor,
Yeah, when
issued
Board of Ed, when
regulations.
she brought it up to Board of Ed, they still wanted the neuropsych. But then when I gave them the medical neuropsych, they still wanted their own psych evaluation. And then they wanted me to take their psych evaluation and bring it back to the medical doctor.
Right, well, I just say to the parent, say at the IEP meeting, in the social history if you have to, that I've been told my child has dyslexia and I'd like to see you put that down in writing.
So where should they put that?
I don't care where they put it, somewhere.
And the management
Somewhere on
needs,
the first page.
right on the first page, exactly.
Prominently.
Somewhere on the first page, parent reports,
So
child has dyslexia.
this is the last comment. Unfortunately, we have to end. Yeah.
I'm a parent of a child with dyslexia and a psychologist. I just wanted to offer one possible route for some additional services that can be kind of a stopgap measure, which is that you can request an assistive technology evaluation, which might get your child the kind of computer program that you were mentioning, and can also get your child some programs like that read aloud and highlight each word on the screen as they're reading, and they listen with headphones. And the part within the DOE that handles the evaluations is actually pretty decent. How it's implemented in school is kind of another matter, but it can at least help your child with dyslexia while they're still stuck in that classroom when they're not having their needs met, be able to access the written materials in a way that works for them and kind of restore some of their confidence and come to enjoy reading in a new way.
If you want an AT evaluation, you need to put it in writing to the chairperson of your local CSE, saying I'm requesting an assistive technology evaluation for my child. Okay? Often what they will tell you is if your child doesn't have OT, they don't qualify. That is not true. Okay? So do not let them say that to you. Once you request it in writing, they must follow up. You will get a form to give to the classroom teacher because you may know more about what your child needs than the classroom teacher is aware of the tech that's out there. I would suggest do some research first, but you're looking for programs like Read and Write Gold, things that are predictive software that predict what the word the child wants as they write. Obviously, with an older child, you're looking for things that will correct spelling and grammar. Drag is not the greatest one. But you know, your phone today, if you look under Google Education, there is a ton of free stuff on the thing that your kid uses every day.
And if
It
you
can read to you, you can do speech to text,
Bookshare offers,
Bookshare.
offers free memberships if
Yeah.
you get an educator to say that they need it.
And if you decide you want to go the route of requesting an evaluation in writing for assistive technology, you can find out all the contact information for your CSC district rep online. It's on the Department of Ed website. Yeah, you just Google just the name, your CSE district information.
What's this?
CSE is Committee for Special Education. Each one has a chairperson, and it depends on what school district you live in.
and the letter needs to go to the chairperson.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, so unfortunately we have to conclude. I just have a few things to say before we officially conclude. So just again, we have one more lecture on Monday. It's mostly focused on the diagnostic piece. And that's something that's very important. We have Dr. Peter Pramateris who will be here because a lot of times, which we didn't, again, today's focus was dyslexia, but there's a lot of terms that come up. ADHD versus executive functioning, language disorder versus learning disability. So this is an important piece for, I think, parents and professionals to understand that nomenclature so we can all speak the same language, which is a starting point when you have an individual that has an underlying learning issue and to understand why that label maybe is appropriate for everyone to understand that child's learning. So that's one. And again, another important piece is that we really appreciate feedback. You can contact us at any point. Again, we would like to have this conversation continue. It's a really important, I think, space where you have professionals, parents that can come, can see how complicated this issue is. And we would love to have something in the fall. So again, if you have any questions, comments, please email us. You can email Craig at thembatutors.com, Julie at thembatutors.com, and we'll keep you posted again about future events. And I'd like to thank you for sitting and listening and participating and being really patient. This is a very in-depth conversation. I would love to thank you. Sure.
Craig, I just
Yeah.
wanted to add, there's a special needs school fair that is
Thank you.
taking place at the JCC. Can everyone hear me? It's on 76th in Amsterdam. It's on April 15th. We usually have it in the fall, but I will be there, and I hope to see as many of you there as possible. All of the specialized schools, or many of the specialized schools, will be there to represent their schools and talk to parents and help you understand what they offer at each of the schools. So please come if you're available. It's Monday, I think it's a Monday night, right? Yeah, Monday night, April 15th.
Great.
And I
Thank
put
you.
my contact information on
So thank you, Chantal. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, everybody.
the board. Don't hesitate.